Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck tech for you, but before that, just a quick reminder to please click like and subscribe if you enjoy my videos. We're well on our way to 1 million subscribers and every single click counts. And today's deck tech is going to be centered around Neyam Shai Murad. For 2 colorless, 1 white and 1 black, it's a legendary creature human rogue 3/3 with Rogue Trader. Whenever Neyam Shai Murad deals combat damage to a player, you may have that player return target permanent card from their graveyard to their hand. If you do, that player chooses a permanent card in your graveyard, then you put it onto the battlefield under your control. So today I wanted to talk about another deck that has meant something to me lately, and this one is kind of special because I built it for my friend who's recently got into Magic. So we've got him in for a couple of months, he's completely hooked now, but he doesn't have that many decks to his disposal, or that many cards for that matter, and last time we played I lent him my Carador deck and he just really enjoyed it. It's quite a strong deck, but it is fairly fair Magic for the most part. He's just playing creatures with a bunch of ETBs and value and reanimating stuff, and he really seemed to like the Reanimator theme and the fact that most of the creatures had abilities and could do stuff when they entered or died. That and the fact that he had mentioned that he wanted a white-black commander made me look at Neyam, and I'd really never noticed Neyam before, but I did a search for commanders that were in black-white and had reanimation themes, and this was by far the most interesting one. Sure, there's a lot more powerful stuff out there like Shilgangar, but this just seemed very interesting to me, and that's kind of one of the lessons that I learned while building this deck, is that a good way to start building a deck is to just narrow it down to colors you like or things that you find interesting, and then do a search on that, and you might often find some overlooked gems, and this definitely felt that way to me. Now, it's not the most powerful commander, so there's a few things that we need to build around to make this work. First, we have to find ways to make it unblockable, so I tried to work a few of those into the deck fairly naturally. Then I also wanted ways to deal with cards in our own and our opponent's graveyard, so there's a lot of graveyard hate, particularly targeted graveyard hate, because that works very well with what we're doing, since our opponents get to pick what we reanimate. We obviously also need our opponents to have stuff in their graveyards, so there's a few discard cards and mill cards to achieve that goal. And overall, I'm super excited with how this deck turned out. It played really well in the first few games we played it, against Gavin Verhey no less, which was absolutely crazy bumping into him in our card shop. And the most amazing thing is that the deck clocks in at just $42. It was holding its own against much more powerful decks, and when you add that to the political aspect of the deck, I think it's a really enjoyable one to play. So without further ado, let's get started, and we're starting off with a Cursed Marauder. This is a card that my friend really likes, and I can see why. It provides some really nice value and fills up everybody's graveyards. Angel of the Ruins is incredibly good in this deck. We need stuff in our graveyard, and this allows us to search for lands whilst also filling up our graveyard, and it's a great reanimation target later, and one that you can even politic your way into getting an opponent to allow you to reanimate, since it can often take care of 2 problem things. Arbiter of Woe is incredibly good when you're dodging that steep additional cost, but actually we don't even care too much about the additional cost in this deck. This is just good to hardcast or to reanimate. Ashen Rider is a classic reanimation card, and it's for good reason. It deals with a permanent when it comes in, and it deals with another on the way out. This is really good. Bringer of the Last Gift is one of the best finishers you can have in a deck like this that wants to be stocking up its own graveyard. It can just finish the game on the spot, particularly if your opponents have big boards but not particularly stocked graveyards. Cataclysmic Gearhook is a really powerful card, and my friend used it to great effect when we played the other day. This is just a repeatable board wipe when you need it to be, and it hits all card types. It's really good. Dusk Mangler is a similar one to Arbiter of Woe. It's got a really powerful ETB, and it's good whether reanimated or hard cast. Eye Collector is really good as an early play that allows everybody to get stuff into their graveyard. Thurger, Judge of Valor is just a really solid mid-range card. It can gain us some life, attack, get in some damage in, block some flyers, and it can actually put stuff in the graveyard as well, which is really good. Grey Merchant of Asphodel is a great finisher in any black deck, and this is no different. Comic Guide is incredibly cheap right now, and it's just a really good way to get stuff back from the graveyard, and the pro black is surprisingly relevant as well. Not to mention that in a deck like this, having it hit the graveyard again because of not paying the echo is upside. Lion Sash is really good graveyard hate. It can mess with our opponent's stuff, and it can exile our own weak cards from our graveyard so that our opponents don't have the chance to choose them. Millikin is really good as a way to stock our graveyard in the early game, so we always have stuff to reanimate. Mindrak Harpy works really nicely by filling up everybody's graveyard every turn. Auric Law Mage can search for that crucial creature to put into your graveyard, and if you have a way to exile other stuff from the graveyard, you can make sure that you get to reanimate it. Rankle Master of Pranks is really solid. 2 out of the 3 modes are going to stock all the graveyards, which is exactly what we want, and the other mode allowing everybody to draw cards is quite good too. Ravenous Chupacabra is just very efficient removal on a creature. Sepulchral Primordial can be an incredible finisher in a deck like this, seeing as it can be recurred over and over. Shadowborn Demon is another card that I'm surprised by how cheap it is these days. This is great removal, and again, we don't really care if it gets sacrificed. Shriekmaw is incredible in the deck. It's removal that can also fill our graveyard with stuff to reanimate. Solemn Simulacrum is just a great card in any deck, to be fair, and in a deck like this that's fairly budget, it pulls extra work. Stonecloaker is a card that I really like to put into decks because it just does a lot of different stuff very nicely. Here it can rebuy ETBs, protect our important creatures at instant speed, and actually remove stuff from graveyards. All the things that we really want in this deck. You can even do the classic play of just bouncing it as the creature of choice, which means that you can use it for 3 mana as an expensive way to remove something from a graveyard. Sun Titan is, as always, very good recursion. In this deck it's particularly good because we will eventually mill stuff like lands into the graveyard, and we don't want our opponents to be able to choose those with our commander, so we can just return them to the battlefield with Sun Titan first. Sunblade Samurai not only has awesome art, but it's a decently staggered creature that allows us to search for a land and gains us some life early on. This is really good. Sarconrad the Grim is another really solid finisher in the deck. This can really win games out of nowhere that you have no business winning. Troll of Gazard Doom is incredibly good in this deck. For just 1 mana, we get to search up for a swamp early game and have a really strong creature in our graveyard that we can reanimate. Timoret Chosen from Death is yet another card that can mess with everybody's graveyard, including our own. Undead Butler fills up our graveyard, and then when it dies, it brings something back to our hand, so it's just really solid. Urborg Scavengers is really good in this deck. We can often exile stuff that has keywords on it, and then this just gets more and more powerful as it can start attacking, hopefully with evasion. Violent Tumor is a really powerful card in the deck because again, it can search any creature to put it into our graveyard, and then we can usually reanimate it fairly soon. Death Touch is also good as well. And Void Beckoner can be great at instant speed, but it can also just be a way to dissuade people from blocking your commander, whilst also putting a pretty big thing into the graveyard. Moving on to sorcery, Beacon of Unrest is a great reanimation spell that's fallen a bit out of favor because it's a little bit slow, but it's very good. Unburial Rites is another classic reanimation spell that we don't really care if it gets milled. Victimize is another cheap reanimation spell that can provide just so much value. And moving on to instants, Dark Bargain is really good because it allows us to refill our hand whilst also putting something into our graveyard. Hostile Negotiations can similarly put stuff into the graveyard whilst drawing us cards. Pylon is a nice bit of removal that we can usually play for fairly cheap that also allows us to dump stuff into our graveyard. And moving on to artifacts, we have Collector's Vault. This is a card that's been more and more impressive to me. It works very nicely here by letting us fill up our graveyard. Commander's Sphere is a card I wouldn't usually draw attention to, but in a deck like this it's very good because we need to make sure we have permanence in our graveyard. Key to the City is the perfect card for this deck. It makes our commander unblockable, which is something we need, and it also fills up our graveyard, and in a pinch it can even draw us cards. Madzalantli, the Great Door, is another really solid one. Filling up our graveyard is exactly what we want to be doing, and flipping it later on shouldn't be that difficult, at which point we have a huge mana generator. Psychic Paper is pretty good. It makes our commander unblockable for fairly cheap, and that's nice. The Ward one is not the hugest deal, but it can be useful sometimes. Thieves' Boots is another really solid one. It can make our commander unblockable and actually gives us a little treasure when it comes in, which is always good. And Zephyr Boots allows our commander to fly, which makes it harder to block, and it also loots on combat damage, which is a great way to fill up our graveyard. Moving on to enchantments, we have Debtor's Knell, which is super cheap right now. This is a classic reanimation card. It's slow, but it's very powerful. Demonic Embrace makes our commander get through fairly easily, and then we can actually play it from our graveyard later on by discarding a card, which is perfect in this deck. Duelist Heritage is not only a fun political card, but also makes our commander trigger twice. Glasswing Grace is a card that again I wouldn't normally highlight, but being able to give our commander evasion whilst counting as a land is really solid. And Tiny Bones Joins Up is just a really cheap way to get everybody to discard a card. We can even make ourselves discard a card to dump something good into the graveyard, so this actually does a surprising amount of work. Moving on to lands, we have Access Tunnel and Rogue's Passage as a way to get our commander through. Tocassia's Dig Site gives us a nice way to dump some extra mana into fueling our graveyard. And Vault of the Archangel is a really solid way to gain back a bunch of life late game or make it so your opponents don't really want to attack you. So there you have it. That has been my Neyam Shai Murad deck tech. I've been really impressed with this deck so far. It's super fun. Do give it a try if you have a chance. It's very cheap. You can make it for about 25 bucks, so there's no reason not to try it out. But what do you think? Are there any cards that you would have added? Any things things you think I shouldn't have included, let me know in the comment section below. I always make sure to read all of your comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care.